So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this webinar focused on Surrey's Important Grassland Inventory. It's a great way to spend a lunchtime, even if I do say so myself. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Zoe Channon. I'm the Director of Nature Solutions and Partnerships here at the Surrey Wildlife Trust, and I'm absolutely delighted to be chairing this session today. Just for ease, a bit of housekeeping. All of you as participants have been assigned camera and sound off. That's in order to enable the smooth running of the webinar. If you do have any technical difficulties, please pop something in the Q&A at the top. You'll see a button there. We've got a couple of people in the background here, so Sophie and Emma Randall, who can provide some technical support if anybody is having any difficulties. As the presenting panel, we will keep our cameras on and then we'll just kind of come on and off mute as we need to. You may find that you have some questions through this session. That's absolutely fine. Please pop them in the Q&A. I will then be chairing a Q&A session at the end, so I'll go through them all and I'll ask them to the panel. And hopefully we'll get some resolution on those. If we run out of time and we don't cover them, we will cover them off as a project team, and we'll come back to this group with any specific answers if there's anything that we haven't got to. So just to set the scene a bit, as we all know, grassland play a really important role in supporting biodiversity, carbon storage, sustainable land management. I mean, I'm preaching to the converted on this call, I know. This inventory we found to be essential in helping our understanding and the protection of these important ecosystems where we can. Today's session will cover insight into the methods and the practical implications of this inventory, and indeed the invaluable role that we hope it will play in planning considerations where possible. Before we start, I would like to extend sincere thanks to the Surrey Botanical Society. Their unwavering commitment to this topic has meant that it has stayed at front of mind for all conservation organisations within the county that have a vested interest here, and particular thanks have to go to Anne Sankey, who has been the champion of this for many, many years. I would also like to extend some thanks to Natural England, who provided seed corn funding to start this project, and indeed the Surrey Wildlife Trust fundraising team, who worked really hard to get additional funding through the Bannister Trust and Hammer Mellis Trust and others to enable us to actually complete this as a programme. That's probably enough from me. Let's get into the detail, as that's why we're all here. So it's with great pleasure that I hand over to Mike Waite. Mike will introduce himself. Many of you will know him. He's the Director of Research and Monitoring here and the ecological brain behind the methodology employed, and indeed a surveyor of many, many of these sites. So Mike, without further ado, I hand over to you and thank you for your time.
Great, thanks very much, Zoe. Right, let's share this and let's start this. Doodly-doo. Hopefully this will work. A thumb up from Alistair or Sophie. Grand. Okay, so I am going to be the main presenter on this now. Take you through some of the salient features of the inventory. Right. Okay, so the Surrey Important Grasslands Inventory, we published this in January of this year, and it is out there and available. We're very proud of it. I won't go into reasons for this, but an interim inventory was published in May in 25, which was a sort of holding report, and then the 1.0 has come published, as it says there, in January 2026. This is a contents page lifted from the document, and I'm going to be picking up on some of those subheadings and explaining a bit more about them as I go along. There's an appendix. There's two appendices. Appendix 1 and 2, it's all the maps of fuller inventory with all the attributes there, and then there's some statistics that I'm going to present. I'll be showing a slide on coming through. So background and context. There's a document there, key document published by BSBI, which focused, attention on grasslands as being just what Zoe was saying, how important they are for biodiversity. There's a lot of attention on things like ancient woodland in planning, especially veteran trees, less so on arguably as the grasslands, ancient grasslands, which have all sorts of ecosystem function and systems that they supply as well. Comparisons with the Ancient Woodland Inventory, it's easy to compare this because obviously the Ancient Woodland Inventory is a list of ancient woodland sites, so, and we're doing a similar thing here. That Ancient Woodland Inventory goes back decades now as a resource that is the evidence base for the planning protection given to ancient woodlands, and we wanted to do a similar thing for grasslands, species-rich grasslands. Surrey, just a bit of a timeline. Zoe already alluded to the Botanical Society, Surrey Botanical Society, suggesting to the Trust that we do something like this, going back some time. And then when funding came available in 2022 from Natural England, we went ahead. That enabled it to happen. The Trust pledged the equal amount, in time to do it. Surrey Biodiversity Information Centre did a similar, made resources available, and then because we were fundraising for it, initially it was envisaged to be a single year's work, but then fundraising raised extra money from the Bannister and Hammermellis Trusts, which actually then extended it out. Essentially, it gave us more time to do original ground truthing survey for to assist with the document. On the name, we started off calling it Irreplaceable. That was the original. I mean, what's in a name? It's not that crucial, but Irreplaceable then kind of was usurped by the formal designation of what irreplaceable habitats are, which don't include any grasslands, not even the lowland meadows of the highest quality. So that name was kind of taken away, but then it was temporarily replaced by, we called it the old grasslands. But a key thing here is that going back to the comparisons with the ancient woodland, we all know that ancient woodland is woodland that's been present from earliest mapping 1600 onwards. You don't have that kind of resource to back up a grassland inventory in a similar way. So for a while we were talking about old ancient grasslands, but we realized that it would be more important and easier to simply identify the resource and not worry so much about the age of it. And so we landed on important grasslands in the end, and that's what it's become. Its key objective is, as an evidence base, to supply bespoke planning protection, as it says there. That is the key output of this. As a habitat type too, not particularly to conserve species. Obviously, species habitats intimately related, but it is as a habitat database first and foremost, and it's complementary to our local wildlife sites system that we have in Surrey, the sites of nature conservation importance, parallels with the ancient woodland inventory, we've already mentioned that, and the Natural England's priority habitat inventory, because it does incorporate all the priority grassland habitats. We're already in consultation with Natural England, and we will be formally updating that with the results of our inventory. So defining importance. I've got, okay, I can move this. There we are. I had you all in a small panel hiding all my text, so that wasn't very handy at all. Defining importance criteria for conclusion. So essentially, it's all grassland dominated land parcels that can be provisionally regarded as representative of the current UK habitat classification 2.0 types, and I've got the next slide tells you what types they are, and I've already said too that it's that includes the relevant grassland habitats of principal importance, priority habitats. A couple of provisos. The qualifying habitat may not be present across the entire land parcel, but for purposes of inventorizing, it's most useful to use land parcels rather than little subdivisions of land parcels. Ancient Woodland Inventory does the same thing. It's the full woodland parcel. But it must be extensive, and that's not absolute, but it must be extensive. But the size of the land parcel included on the inventory, that there is no size threshold to this. But conversely, where minor, where you know the situation with acid grassland classically on heathlands, intimately intertwined with heathland and scrub and what have you, they're excluded from this. Sites in golf courses excluded because again it can be so diffuse across the fairways and roughs and things like that. We haven't included golf courses, but they are the important golf courses that do contain otherwise qualifying grasslands that would qualify. We've included in an annex to the document. On versions of transport infrastructure, that's also excluded, but there is the ongoing Conservation Road Verge Habitats Action Plan, which is a separate initiative that's been ongoing at the same time. So it is it works alongside that. Right, where's my, okay, sorry, having navigation problems here. Right, they're the habitat types. Won't go into that, but essentially you've got that column level 3 acid. It breaks down into acid grassland, calcareous grassland and neutral grassland types. We include floodplain and grazing marsh, which is a priority habitat. It may not be wonderfully species rich in some cases, but it does fulfill that very important function of flood retention and things like that. So we've included that in this. That last column, of course, includes the distinction types, which are important within the net gain metric. Exclusions, I've already said this, but there's some nice photographs of I mean, we've included the types of old grassland you find within churchyards and cemeteries, village greens, etc. out. Yeah, I said that the grassland on heathlands and out road verges, golf courses. Now, a steering group worked on this project with representatives from all those logoed organisations there. Key were the Surrey Botanical Society, clearly, and Butterfly Conservation, Surrey Fungus Group, because actually I'll say it now because I'm not sure it comes up again, but it does include the grasslands that are sometimes referred to as wax-cap grasslands. So undisturbed old grassland that supports fungi from the CHEDG group, CHEGD group. I won't go through what they are, but they are things like wax caps and earth tongues and pink gills and things like this. It is a special suite of grassland fungi that have declined very much in the landscape, and we worked with a threshold of whether 10 species of those, over 10 species, that was a qualifying criterion for including them in the inventory. So on to methodology for this. That is a list. I'm not going to go through this, but that is a list of available data sets from which we pulled together an initial list. So in other words, there have been attempts at bringing together this kind of information before, maybe for different types of grasslands. Classic there is the Chalk Grassland Survey by Simon Humphreys in 1999. So there was data out there, and it was all reviewed and pulled into an initial list to start with. The Surrey Botanical Society's database, very thousands and thousands of records, was analysed to look for axiophytes. Now, axiophytes are indicator species. That's really what they are, and you can have them for all sorts of habitats. We were using ones obviously relevant to grassland habitats, and we initially we took, well, a member of SBS analysed the vast database and put together clustering of axiophytes over 10, over 20, and that focused us down onto working to find initial set of results that we added into those previous data sets as well. We then translated what were then clusters into actually working out what the land parcels were that supported those records, because sometimes they fell within those excluded types, on grassland verges, road verges, and this kind of thing. So we firmed up on those land parcels supporting those types. Just to say that the inventory includes all SSI grassland units, sites of nature conservation importance with grassland, that are notified for their grassland habitats, and that's the Surrey fungus study group that I was just saying, over 10 species of the types of fungi. So that ended up in the creation of a grassland inventory GIS layer, and that's what you're looking at behind this text box. And then lots of further interpretation from aerial imagery, and then there was clearly some ground truthing to be done. In 2023, around 75 sites were professionally surveyed, and 2025, just last year, the final field season 4 survey, 145 sites were looked at, which took out a sort of a short waiting list that we knew we needed more data for. And so that was all done. That shows the result of the result of the axiophyte analysis. You can see how the different counts of species, the taxa counts there, sort of flagged up in different colours. So that pinpointed these clusterings of axiophyte species that we then translated into land parcels. The ground truthing is some nice meadows, just show us what we're talking about. The ground truthing was obviously, it itself had to be prioritised. We needed to, at the top of those were sites that were looking from aerial imagery that there were sites we didn't know anything about at all, and we needed to find out about them. So they were the top of the list, and then perhaps SNCI sites that hadn't been surveyed for some time, because a lot of them haven't been surveyed for some time, especially ones that looked like they may have been damaged. They then were prioritised. So we had a sort of prioritising list for the ground surveying phase. Results. that is lifted from the appendix now. You'll see we've got maps sorting the various land parcels on the inventory into their different UK habitat types. Now, so this is a table that's in this appendix 2 of the document. Breaks everything down into the habitat types at the top by borough. I keep losing my navigation bar, which isn't handy. Yeah, there was something that's gone away. The number of sites on the inventory is 460 in all. Named sites, lines on the list in the table, but that's pretty meaningless in the sense that some of those sites, there's a huge range in the size of them. It was more convenience that dictated whether sites had an individual line, or because indeed some are called composite sites, so they could have been broken into 3 or 4 different named sites, but they were essentially part of an area, so they were simply called composite sites. Some sites were huge, vast floodplain stretches along the way, and then you've got, contrary to that, you've got some very sub 1 hectare, units as well. So 460 sites is pretty meaningless. But what is more important is that the total there with the red ring around it, this it amounts to just under 4,000 hectares of land in Surrey, and that sounds like a lot, but it is under 3% of land use in Surrey. So that just shows you how selective and how rare these qualifying habitats are. We're not saying it's that there will still probably be sites that we haven't found, and that is why Alistair is going to tell us about subsequent cycling of revisions to this. That's the aspiration anyway, but from what we have on 1.0, version 1.0 at the moment, it is under 3% of land use in Surrey. There's a pie diagram just to show how that breaks down. You can see that by far the majority is neutral grassland, including the floodplain grazing marsh element. Calcareous and acidic are about the same, but that is remember that the acidic excludes the element within heathland sites, larger heathland sites, essentially, where a lot of it is. To be quite honest. And there's, if you can remember back to that contents page right at the beginning, there's a section on management recommendations, because not only do we want this document to be of use as the key evidence base that yourselves as planners will then be able to use to back up any policy, protection policy, we also want it to be of use to the actual owners of these sites themselves, which will give them some headers. It's not comprehensive, this section at all. It's very generic, in fact, but it establishes the principles of what management should be trying to do to retain that species richness on these grassland sites, and it breaks down into how to remove the annual biomass increase by grazing or mowing, what have you, and then applications or not, no need for any applications, and in other words, these applications, draining, seeding, how to go about enhancing and retaining the botanical interest of the sites, essentially. So application for planning purposes. The document contains a recommended planning policy. There's nothing startling around that. It's a fairly standard wording that you'll see for most biodiversity protection type policy. There it is. I'm not going to read it out. And that's what the partnership, sorry, Biodiversity Partnership, as publishers of the document, this is what we'd be recommending, that planning departments would adopt a kind of policy as here. That would be ideal. But there's a few things coming down the pipe, and just to bring things up to current state of affairs in planning, obviously the local government reorganisation will be sorting our 11 boroughs and districts into the 2 unitary boroughs, West and East Surrey, come next year, starting. So that will eventually require a whole new round of local planning, producing local plans. So clearly there will be an interim period when retention of the best of biodiversity policies existing in the various boroughs and districts policy. We'd be looking to get the best of those retained, but it's obviously an area of jeopardy for biodiversity planning policy going forward. We've got the revised National Planning Policy Framework that's out to the jury at the moment. The consultation finished on that a month or so ago, and one of the key messages from that, certainly from my reading of it and talking to other people, is that there's a general steer coming from this, that going off piste, as it were, with local initiatives is not desirable from current government. Certainly I'm not obviously a couple of our boroughs worked very, very hard at getting an elevated minimum biodiversity net gain into their local plans, Guildford, Mole Valley, and such. But going forwards, this the steer now coming from the National Planning Policy Framework is that there's going to be a specific call to actually say such elevations over the statutory minimum it would probably not make it through the Secretary of State sign off going forward, because it's specifically named as not something to do. And then obviously the Planning and Infrastructure Act has been a worry for biodiversity professionals in the watering down of certain protections, and suffice to say that the SIEM, I've got the quote there, continues to be of the view that the Act is a regression of environmental protections. So obviously it's not going to be, we will be pressing for this policy to be taken up, but there will be hoops to jump through, is what I'm trying to say, I think. So that is pretty much from me. I'm going to hand over to Alistair here. Do save your questions to this, and we'll attempt to answer them in the Q&A session. Yeah. So I'll stop sharing and hand over to Alistair Kirk.
Thank you, Mike, and good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely, as Zoe says, to be with you today to talk about the work of the Surrey Grassland Inventory. So my section really is, as the title says, what comes next. So basically, how do we build on all of the work that Mike has just described, that's sort of been undertaken certainly for the last 3 years, and sort of for longer than that, certainly in terms of sort of preparation. So before we move on to to look at that in more detail, obviously Mike's sort of given you quite a lot of information, quite a lot of food for thought. And if you're thinking, I really want to dig into this in a little bit more detail, and you haven't already had a chance to do so, then I would say go to the Important Grassland Inventory page on the Surrey Nature Partnership website, where you'll find more detailed background information, and you'll also be able to download a full copy of the report and the appendices appendices which Mike has described. And very, very recently, we've also just uploaded sort of a GIS layer, which will include, or which contains all of the information, all of the boundaries for all of the 460 sites which have been identified in version 1 of the inventory. So just a little bit more about that. As I say, the data set has been developed to contain the defined boundaries for all of those sort of sites. There's an attribute table that goes with the actual sort of boundary layer. So that sort of basically sort of duplicates the summary information which is taken from the main sort of inventory table. So it provides the unique identifier, information about the habitat which has been provisionally identified sort of for that site, and so on and so on. Now we're making this available to anybody who wants to use it under an open data license, specifically a Creative Commons with attribution license for non-commercial use, or CC BY-NC. That should allow anybody to sort of to use the data, reproduce it in any of their reports, as long as it's for non-commercial purposes. The actual data set itself, we have a defined description for it, terms of use, and an acknowledgement that we'd like people sort of to reproduce if they're sort of sort of extracting information and including it on their own maps. Now we've tried to make the GIS layer as accessible as possible. So if you go onto the Nature Partnership website, you'll find that there is a map viewer, an Esri map viewer window. If you click on that, you don't need GIS or any other software. You'll be able to access the sort of the inventory layer and be able to move around the county, click on a site and find information about that site. If you have access to more sort of specialist software, you'll find a link on the Nature Partnership website where you can include the inventory layer as part of an ARC Online sort of ARC Online project. We've also made the information available as what's called a web feature service. So if you use ARC Pro or QGIS, then basically again you can add the layer into your projects. If for whatever reason you need an offline copy, we can make those available on request, but we are going to do that under license. Now, the reason why we're doing that is simply so we can keep, basically, be informed in terms of how people are using the layer. But equally, we also want to make sure that people are using the most up-to-date layer. So, we'll retain information in terms of who we've shared the layer to, sort of in an offline format. So, if and when the layer gets updated, then we'll make sure that we'll share that with people sort of directly. So moving on, what comes next in terms of the review period? And as Mike has touched on this, we want the Important Grassland Inventory to be sort of, a live product, in the sense that it isn't going to be sort of set in stone. This work hasn't finished in 2026. It's recognizing that, we've done as good a job as we could do over the last 3 years in terms of identifying where these grasslands are, but, more information will come along. So that process is going to be coordinated by the Surrey Biodiversity Information Centre. That's the organisation that sort of I manage, and we'll hopefully undertake, or we plan to undertake, an initial sort of probably quite sort of simple review in 2028. Now, simple in the sense that what we would like to do as part of that initial sort of project will be just sort of to identify where errors may have been sort of incorporated into the inventory, where we've made a small mistake, and we'll be able to use that initial period to sort of update the inventory in a sort of small way. However, more significant reviews, I'm tending to undertake those sort of every 5 years. So the first of those will be in 2023. Now, how that will work, the detail, we're still sort of pulling that together, but in essence it will be similar to the process for identifying and selecting and reviewing sites of nature conservation importance, or local wildlife sites. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on, so I won't go into sort of massive amount of detail, but in essence the process that we use as part of the Surrey Local Sites Partnership will be very similar to the one we're intending to use to update and review the grassland inventory. If you have any information about potential sites which might have been missed, or you want to comment on an existing site, or you've got any questions about the inventory, on the Important Grassland Inventory sort of web page on the Nature Partnership website, you'll find a contact form. Fill that out, send it over, and we'll be able to sort of get back to you, hopefully with an answer to that question. Similarly, you can also email us direct at the email address shown on the screen there, grasslands.inventory@surreywt.org.uk. So what are some of the other things that we've been doing or that we're planning to do? Well, we're talking currently in sort of discussions with Natural England about how we might be able to incorporate the results of the Important Grassland Inventory into their priority habitats data set. There are a few questions that we still need to sort of resolve as to sort of how best we can do that, but it has always been a very key part of the, there's one of the aims for the project is how we can help to update some of the national data sets with regards to identifying these key priority and irreplaceable sort of habitats. We also want to work with other organisations and help support other organisations around the country who are sort of looking to do sort of something similar. So we'll be having conversations with people like Plant Life, who are very much championing sort of grasslands, as a habitat type, as an underrepresented habitat type, sort of going forward. We'll also look for opportunities to consider sort of more landscape scale recovery projects, and we are sort of working with and have sort of signed up to work with sort of Big Chalk, which is a project that some of you may well be aware of. We'd also, we've learned a lot over the last 3 years in terms of sort of, the how to, sort of pull together sort of which, as I say, what will hopefully be a really sort of key data set. And we want to use that information, use those learnings sort of going forward in other projects that the Wildlife Trust and the Biodiversity Information Centre and other partners will hopefully sort of start to sort of look at. And that will include sort of additional sort of inventories for other underrepresented sort of habitats. And one of the ones that we're sort of starting to work on sort of at the moment, we'll be working on much more sort of, in sort of significantly over the next sort of 12 to 18 months, we'll be looking at sort of various different wetland habitats across the county. And as we've already touched on, both in Mike's presentation and sort of earlier in mine, we will start to think about how we can incorporate some of the most important or the sort of, the key insights identified by the inventory into the existing suite of local wildlife sites or sites of nature conservation importance for the county. And I'll just take a few moments now to run through that in a little bit more detail. So for those of you who might not have come across them before, as I say, local wildlife sites or sites of nature conservation importance, or SNCIs as we refer to them in Surrey, they are basically sites which have been identified for their substantive nature conservation value, but they are non-statutory. In other words, they have no legal protection, and what protection they do receive, they receive through the planning system. That said, many of them are of equal importance to the suite of SSSIs, or sites of special scientific interest, that we'll all be familiar with. Now, one of the differences between SNCIs and SSSIs is that the SNCI sort of series aims to be inclusive and comprehensive. In other words, any site which meets the criteria should be identified as an SNCI, whereas SSSIs, the aim was to identify and protect a representative sample of the key habitat types within a particular area. So that's one key difference between the two designations. We currently have 775 SNCIs identified across the county, which equate to just over 15,000 hectares or 9% of Surrey. Again, compared with SSSIs only cover 7.4% of the county. So that process is overseen, and the selection and identification of SNCIs is overseen by the Surrey Local Sites Partnership, which is a subgroup of the Nature Partnership. Now, SPIC acts as a secretariat for that group, so a similar role to the one that we'll be playing for the Grassland Inventory going forward. And in doing so, we coordinate the selection and reselection process. Now, SLSP members include representatives from the County Council, the Wildlife Trust, statutory agencies, county recorders, and members of Surrey specialist recording groups. What does that look like? What do these SNCIs look like sort of on a nice map? Always love a nice map. And so you can see here the 770 so sites. Rather, as Mike was talking about the grassland inventory, they vary very much in size from large chunks of sort of the chalk grassland, sort of on the edges, sort of across the North Downs, and the sort of large areas of woodland, sort of elsewhere in the county, but equally very small sort of sites. Sort of less than a hectare. And, one thing that I would say about the existing suite of SNCIs is that it probably is very much underrepresenting sort of grassland types. And then again, that was one of the reasons why we wanted to go through with the inventory, was to make sure that grasslands were properly sort of represented within SNCIs, and therefore within the local planning sort of policy for the various different LPAs around the county. So Local Sites Partnership, not going to go into this into too much detail, but in essence, there are set terms of reference, and we also have updated guidance to how SNCIs should be identified. Now, sites can be nominated by any qualified person or group. So in essence, the Important Grassland Inventory will sort of feed into that process in that way. But what's key is that we need to have validated and documented evidence in order to be able to evaluate the site against the criteria. Now, the SLSP is the final arbiter in terms of sort of site selection, but once sites have been identified and initially reviewed by the Local Sites Partnership, there is an opportunity for site owners to sort of to challenge the decision, but only on sort of scientific grounds. And once that consultation period has been sort of completed, then these additional sites will be passed on to the relevant LPAs for formal adoption alongside the existing sort of suite of SNCIs, which will appear within their local plans. These are some of the documents that we're talking about. Again, if you go onto the Nature Partnership website, this time go for the Local Sites Partnership sort of pages, you'll be able to find these documents if you haven't already seen them. Practically, what that will mean as far as the grassland sites are concerned, I'm not sure how well this will appear depending on your size of your screen, I suspect, but in essence, you'll see that there are sort of criteria here. This one is looking at sort of lowland meadows and neutral grassland, and you can see we have sort of three sort of different sort of criteria. Now, the first criteria will look at sort of the sort of definition of the habitat types sort of found on site. That uses both the UK habitat classification and which many of you will know is now a key part of the biodiversity net gain process, but it also refers back to National Vegetation Classification Communities or NVC types, which is a sort of a longer established sort of but equally sort of valid habitat classification system. Then, as Mike said, we will look at the number of sort of axiophyte species, or the sort of key species of indicating sort of grassland quality. And one thing that we'll do now the grassland inventory has been sort of published is you'll see there's a little sort of red block there, which basically sort of was a reference back to using the grassland inventory to identify the threshold for how many species are indicative of a high quality grassland in Surrey. So that's a piece of work that we'll sort of tie up over the next sort of few months. And then there are references back to sort of some of the other criteria in this document, which are specifically related to sort of species. So it will go on, and the next sort of page shows you sort of lowland grassland criteria, but actually this one here, this little sort of bullet point here, it's a key point in some ways, which is to make the point that the fact that a site is included on the grassland inventory won't mean that it automatically becomes an SNCI. It is a separate process that we will work through. We'll need to make sure that the information is there, that the site meets this, the different criteria for selection as an SNCI. And the final sort of snapshot from the criteria that was just going to include linking back to sort of H sort of 15 there, which was just a reference to specifically to the vascular plans in terms of, what are the other indicators that we might use for identifying sort of an SNCI sort of worthy sort of grassland, and that would be a species which is either sort of protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act, whether whether it's sort of considered to be nationally rare or scarce, or whether it's previously been identified as a UK BAP priority species or a Section 41 species, but also whether or not it's considered to be rare or scarce in Surrey. And there we go. So that's a quick run through some of the actions or the activity that's going to be carrying on as far as the grassland inventory is concerned, but also how that might link into SNCIs and actually making sure that these sites, now we've identified them, get some additional protection through the local planning process, which leads us into our question and answer section.
Lovely. Thank you, Alistair. If you are comfortable unsharing, then I think we can just get the screen back to what it was. Lovely. Thank you. And thank you to both of you. I mean, as you say, it's been a bit of a journey of discovery for all of us, but it's been a fantastic project to work on. We've got a couple of questions from Joe, actually, so I'll just work through them. Joe said, "Thank you very much. Fantastic work." Thanks, Joe. "I wondered whether you had demoed this to the DEFRA Elm team. In the land use framework, there is a mention of them having an ambition in future years to spatially target some elements of elm."
I'll go first, Alistair, if you...
Yeah.
No, we haven't. There's a short answer. Really, we haven't thought through to that stage. So thank you very much for that suggestion.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I mean, our first port of call, we've already touched on it, is to update the priority habitat inventory of natural England. You would hope that DEFRA family, one, would be informing other things along those lines. But if it's an open door, we'd be glad to give something to DEFRA on that business. I think you'd agree, Zoe, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I agree. I think that's a really good point. Joe's also asked if there are any conclusions we could draw from the work about the gaps on the priority habitat inventory. So one of the concerns with the planning system is changes is an over-reliance on desk-based data sets. We want to demonstrate that the priority habitat inventory has gaps. So Mike, do you want to pick that one up again as well? And then Alistair, feel free to come in after.
So the questions around the infallibility of PHI as it stands?
Yeah, I think so in essence.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, I mean, it's recognised that the way, Alistair can correct me on this, but the way the PHI is put together only has an element of ground truthing. It is mostly desk-based, as you've said. And everybody's aware that of the limitations of that. It's a constantly evolving database too. You get new data sets come in for different habitat types. Just in the early conversations we've had with the Natural England Grassland specialists, she has said, yes, we would very much welcome this because we're very conscious of the limitations. And it speaks to the openness that Natural England have to be able to correct that up. I mean, one of the not problems, but one of the things about publishing on the PHI is that you need landowner consent to put data up like that. So that's something that we need to think about. And while I'm talking about that, most of all the ground truthing that was done here was from public rights of way or with the permission of the owners, because we did get some, many owners did agree to be able for us to go on site. So that was possible. But that is why we call it provisional as well, because it's a real mixed bag of the amount of data we have on these sites. Some, an element will definitely be of these habitat UK types, but there is an element where the strict methodology to ascertain that was not possible because of the access limitations. So we have to. So generically, we're calling it provisionally of that standard. Have I answered the question?
Yeah, I think so, Mike. Was there anything you wanted to add in, Alistair?
No, not a lot really. It was just to say that I think, yeah, I mean, obviously when the priority habitat inventory was initially being developed, Natural England had to work with what resources were available to them, and some of those were were quite old. I mean, some of the the grassland surveys, which sort of fed into the triple SI sort of selection process, were from the sort of late 1980s, early 1990s. So there was there was a yeah. An imperfect picture when that data set was originally being developed. Now, a lot of that, they've been able to add additional data over time, sort of information from agri-environment schemes, where that sort of, updated boundaries for individual habitats have been submitted as part of that. But, absolutely, there was a recognition when we were talking to the grassland specialists that, they don't have currently have a very good picture of grasslands as far as the priority habitats inventory are concerned. And they are very willing to work with, organizations, such as, the partnership was pulled together, the priority habitats, the important grasslands inventory rather, in order to update that data set. So, I think all parties are willing, as Mike has outlined. There are quite a few sort of issues that we still need to work through. But they recognise that they need to do a better job as far as identifying these habitats are concerned.
Lovely, thank you both. Tom, thank you. I'll come to Tom's put a comment on here. Tom from Guildford Borough Council. Thank you for the info and the suggestions on local policy. Let's hope we can find a way to solve this. Also interesting to see a high percentage of the important grasslands in Guildford. So thanks, Tom. That's appreciated. He's also asked a question. So it says, for fungi surveys, we have wax caps on a couple of the sites, either known in the past or seen occasionally. Was CHEGD based on visual survey, or might we also consider eDNA for acid grassland sites where there is potential for wax caps?
I'll do that again, Alice. The records database used by the Surrey Fungus Study Group was by physical survey. I don't think, for all I know, they've started to think about eDNA surveying, but the records database that we were using was from definite physical survey of fruiting bodies, eyeballed on the individual sites. But that's a conversation to be had with Brian Spooner, the representative from SFSG, on the steering group, I would think, going forward.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think it is, to date, it's largely based on traditional sort of survey methods. But actually, yeah, going forward, eDNA, it's a developing, rapidly sort of developing area. So I suspect it's definitely something sort of to be considered for the future.
Yeah, because the group is based out of Kew.
Yes.
And they're very much at the forefront of the use of these methods. So yeah, if it's available, they will be addressing that.
Lovely, thank you both. You've got a couple more questions coming through now. So we've got one from Claire Chappell. She has said, sorry if I missed this, I was a little bit late. Is the data set incorporated into the local nature recovery strategy? So the one that Adam Brown's been working on at SCC?
Yeah, yes, I overlooked that. That was something I should have put into my presentation. Definitely, at all stages of the development of the now adopted local nature recovery strategy in Surrey, the information available at the time was fed into the LNRS, and yeah, there was absolutely clear join up there with what we had available to Adam Brown at the time, and the latest, the Inventory 1.0 is what's been incorporated now into the LNRS. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically, the aim is to join across anything like that within Surrey across everything we do. So that's fabulous. I've got a question from Daniel here, and it's actually related to the question that Claire asked, which is, how do you see this interacting with LNRS in informing local plan policies?
Alistair, do you want to do that while I think about answering? I mean, really,
I don't know.
questions
This is
right
where
around,
we're good to have sort of Adam on the call. I know he can't make it sort of today. I think. Yeah, I think one of the issues with the LNRS process, and issues is probably not the right word, but yeah, one of I was going to replace issues with challenges, which is probably even worse. But yeah, one of the sort of the things that's we've had to sort of to deal with as far as the LNS process was concerned, and ESPIC have been part of the overall sort of steering group, is that sort of quite a lot of the guidance on implementation, has been sort of has been a developing sort of a resource as far as the LNRS sort of teams are concerned. So I think we're still sort of getting to grips with how LNRS and local plan policies are sort of are going to sort of interact sort of going forward. So the LNRS has now been published. It's gone off to Natural England. It's gone off to DEFRA, and I think it's sort of one of the things that Adam will now be working on is basically now we have these sort of priorities which we've identified for sort of habitats, for species, for sort of action on the ground in a whole range of different ways. It's how we can incorporate that into local plans. But yeah, sort of DEFRA have provided sort of detailed sort of guidance sort of on that.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, certainly the high level measures, that's how they describe actions, really for LNRS purposes. There's a set of those refer to the grassland habitats, and they would apply to the data set established from the interim, from the inventory, not interim, from the inventory 1.0 grasslands. Yes, that's that, and there is this seamless join up on that with the outcomes of the grasslands inventory and the LNRS. For sure. Sorry.
Lovely. Yeah, no, thank you both. I've put a final call out for questions, and at the moment we don't have any more. So I'm hoping that everyone has sort of either gleaned the information that they need from this, or indeed asked what they want to. If anything comes up after this webinar, you've got the contact details for the Surrey.Grassland. It's probably not that now. I can't remember what the link is, but grasslands.inventory at surreywt.org.uk. Thanks, Alistair. And we are really happy for two-way dialogue on this, and indeed if you've got any thoughts or things that you'd like to put through to us afterwards, please do. This is our first foray into an inventory that's effectively non-statutory in the same way that the ancient woodland one was, so really happy for thoughts. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all for your time and for sharing your lunchtime with us. And of course, thank you to the presentation panel who've put time and effort into articulating that today. So I'll draw this to a close. I'd like to invite the presentation panel to just stay on afterwards, just so that we could go through some post-administration stuff to close off the call. And we look forward to speaking to you all soon. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Someone's